Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in just a minute. Welcome to the modern way to work with vendors in NetSuite, faster onboarding and smoother invoices. Just give a few moments for people to come in, and then we will kick it right off. All right. Well, I'm Chris Crompton. I'm product marketer here at Charted. And just a quick note, this session is being recorded, and we're going to have time at the end for Q&A. So there's actually, it should be a Q&A little button there in the Zoom webinar interface that you can put your questions in as we're going, and then we'll see what we can get to at the end. So let's jump right in. Okay. Just a minute. Okay, so as I said, I'm Chris Crompton, and I'll be hosting, but it'll mostly be Marlon who is uh, doing the thought leadership stuff. He's the subject matter expert. He's actually a senior product marketer, or no, that's me, senior product manager here at Charted, and he's the expert behind our vendor onboarding solution, which you're going to see today. And he's able to accumulate all of his knowledge because he works super closely with customers and understands different teams and what's been slowing people down, and how to fix it. So he'll lead the main content, and he's going to walk through a demo in just a bit as well. So the plan for today, let's go on, is pretty straightforward. We're going to quickly talk through the hidden friction that you experience with vendor management. I think this is going to resonate with you all, and how it impacts a lot more than just the vendor record. Then Marlon's going to walk through what the modern vendor onboarding workflow should look like in NetSuite and present the demo, as I said, so you can see it all in action. And then I'll share a practical takeaway guide. You can download it, and we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So as I said before, feel free to drop in your questions as we're going, and we will keep an eye on those and make time, hopefully, at the end for a few of them. So, all right, you're up, Marlon.
Thanks, Chris, and nice to meet everyone here today. As Chris introed me, I am a product manager here at Charted. Have been here for about a year and a half. Started my career at Ernst& Young in kind of the consulting practice, made my way over to product in the payment space about 5 years ago. In addition to owning a vendor onboarding and which is going to be the focus of today's conversation, I also own our payments offering. So happy to speak to that as well if those questions come up. You'll find that they are very interlinked together. The primary reason why we onboard vendors is to make payments to them in AP, obviously. So there's a lot of interplay, a lot of interconnectedness there. Happy to be kind of talking a little bit more about this today. I'm also going to be, in addition to kind of talking some of the friction points that we see, talking to our customers, I'm also going to be doing a demo today of our current offering. And that will be here in a few moments. So let's start talking about vendor onboarding, where that AP friction really starts. And I think, like, by and large, vendor onboarding is an often overlooked piece of accounts payable process. We're often kind of thinking about, making that payment. We're thinking about processing the invoice, the OCR side of the house. We're thinking about PO matching, three-way match. But vendor onboarding is a very critical part because, I mean, if you're our business, have hundreds, thousands of vendors, that's a lot of communications that's going to go back and forth between you and your vendors. Also, what we found is, a good vendor experience is going to make for a kind of a more satisfied vendor too. So it might be happier to kind of communicate with you if there's a very clear process of how they deliver updates on their bank account information, for example, or oh, we've got acquired by a business and we need to change our subsidiary information, our name information, business information. If that's super clear on how to do so, it makes for a much better experience. So it is often overlooked part and component of AP. If you think about, the big four areas, it's kind of vendors as kind of being that first component, invoices, payments, and then accruals is kind of that last step for companies that have AP. Again, a vendor is really where that's going to start. So a lot of the friction points are going to tend to compound upon each other. And so if we go to the next slide here, I'm going to start walking through some of the complexity that we see here. So starting on the left, we'll find that typically we see a lot of companies resort to either like a very informal kind of way of updating vendor information. That might be via an Excel file or something like that. We've also seen vendor portals as a common way as well. But we also know that what we found is that vendors don't really necessarily love managing credential information. If they get locked out, they forget their password. It's sometimes unclear on who owns that portal as well. So it's just another login. And if you're a vendor making payments to or receiving payments from multiple different companies, hundreds, thousands of companies, managing 1,000 different credentials is an impossible exercise. So what we found is kind of veering off of that track and making a more simple, unified experience that doesn't require, it kind of has that sweet spot of not being a heavy-handed, fully onboarded vendor portal situation, but also not being like a very informal Excel, CSV type driven situation too, which we found is kind of prone to potential fraud, incorrect formatting of data. There's a lack of validation in those files, and overall, it just creates a lot of chaos. And yeah, the theme of this slide and what we're trying to come across as well is like it does create a ripple effect. And if, often that ripple effect and these effects that compound on each other, they are really starting that vendor onboarding phase. And so, for example, if you don't have the right business information, if you don't have the right address, well, if you send a check to the business, or if you send ACH information as well, like it's going to go to the wrong address. Same goes for ACH information for bank accounts. If you gather the wrong information, let's say they fat finger and add an additional account number, and then that information is incorrect, then that payment gets returned and that results in a delayed payment. Same can be said for kind of resolving three-way match capacities down the road when you start thinking about invoices. On the payment side, obviously there's kind of a lot of things that could potentially go wrong if the information is incorrect as well. Then reconciling that payment at the end of the month and making sure that it's matching up with the bank account. There's not a return on that payment. That's a very critical exercise as well. And then at kind of the month end, when it comes to accruals, kind of reconciling actual and accrued expenses is an exercise that, accountants are probably worrying about at month end close, and that can delay the month end close and in turn create just an expensive and chaotic process. And that's really what we're trying to avoid. And a lot of the pain points here can be resolved with different solutions, but a lot of them do kind of root in that kind of vendor onboarding step as kind of being a fundamental step to kick off the process. So what does this really result for your business from an impact driven situation? There's really just four different buckets when you think about quantifying or qualifying the impact here. So first is time. It's just there's a lot of back and forth communication between you and your vendors. If that's done informally, then there's a lot of email threads just flying around on your email servers. It can be difficult to manage, especially as your team scales and grows. It can be sometimes difficult if there's a lot of complexity or back and forth there and just very long threads that tend to happen. There's errors that can happen if you're not using a formal process, lack of structure, maybe it's not formatted correctly. Maybe that information is not flowing back to NetSuite in the right kind of way as well. So there's an additional step there to manage that. Especially if you're even using a third-party system that the data might not be completely synced there as well. There might be a delay in that sync process. The third area is like actually a delay of a process or a payment or some kind of downstream impact, right? If the vendor is not onboarded correctly, it does create downstream impacts for the business. If you're measuring things like, how long does it take for a customer to get paid after an invoice is created? A lot of teams are starting to move toward more of this metric driven space. And what you find is like the vendor onboarding piece can be highly variable in terms of how long it takes. So kind of locking that down and getting that process optimized is really important. And then the last is just scale overall. I think it's maybe easy to do once if you're just managing a handful of vendors, but as you continue to grow your business, if you're looking to expand internationally, if there's an acquisition, something of this nature, then just scaling up that process, a lot of those pain points just tend to multiply themselves in those kind of scenarios. So those are the costs and how you can kind of think about like a framework for quantifying and qualifying your business impact here and making the business case for vendor onboarding and kind of optimizing that. So what would it be if it could look a little different, like in an ideal world, like what would it look like? I think it'd be really simple in terms of like the vendor experience itself, like a single page, not a lot of complexity in terms of dynamic forms and not a lot of complexity in terms of like multiple steps to click through, which you sometimes see drop off on vendors. They just don't want to deal with it, right? Making it branded and personalized is really important for businesses too. It kind of brings that air of legitimacy to the experience as well. Making it super customizable on top of that. So, if you need to collect a form that's unique to your industry or business, you could do so, and you're not kind of locked into a particular set of fields. And then just making that experience just altogether seamless, especially, thinking about connecting back to your NetSuite instance as well, because that's your source of truth, right? That's where the data needs to live, regardless of what the application or the tool that you're using to gather that data. So with that, I just wanted to kind of demonstrate what we have here at Charted for vendor onboarding. Yeah, I'll open up for any kind of questions after this as well. So I'm just going to share some of the basic capabilities and what the form looks like. So first of all, if we go into our NetSuite instance, you can see like Charted, it is a suite app, so it does kind of live natively within your existing workflow. So you can see here, there's now AVO is specifically it's a bundle that you can use to install to your account. And what it does is it's going to create some new options both on setup and lists as well, so that allowing you to effectively manage kind of your vendor onboarding process. So if we go to you'll see a new section, Advanced Form Builder. We'll click on Forms. You can effectively like save different forms and different templates, and we have a ton of different templates saved because this is just like a test account that we use. But I'm going to pull up one just for demonstration. And the idea behind Advanced Vendor Onboarding is it's really flexible in terms of what you can do. I made a very basic one to just for purpose of this demonstration, but there's a lot of information you can ask for, you can require it, you can make those fields optional as well. And you can also kind of customize the message in terms of actually how the email and the request for information gets communicated to the vendor. You can even layer in like HTML as well if you want to do that in terms of how the email looks. I haven't done that in this case. I just made it really simple. But you can see now here what's really important is this is kind of the layout in terms of what the vendor is going to see and how the form is constructed. We have like a regular standard template, but in order to if you want to add, subtract, differentiate, just change your fields, your look and feel of it, add new fields, add new drop downs, you can do so fairly easily through the Advanced Onboarding service. If you want something a little bit more customized and We also have like an implementation team can really help you kind of finely tune things as well for a new template. But when you are creating a new field, so you can just say like custom field, you basically just label it. Label is here. And then you can see there's different types. So there's like freeform text, which is the default. You can add hyperlink. You can collect email address, which is going to do additional validation. If you're capturing payment method details, you can do so as well. If you want to like upload a document, so by default, we have W9 in our standard, but if there's a different document, you can do so through this form as well. By default, it's going to be turned on as optional, but if you want to make it a required field, you can do so too. You can even customize like whether it's communicated via one column, two columns, three columns as well. And then also importantly, like you can differentiate or instruct AVO on how to send that information to NetSuite. So specifically, what NetSuite field do you want to map this information to once the vendor applies it? So in this case, you can see like these are the default IDs that we pass through on this form. You can also see like we are passing, like we have the ability to map this to a custom field as well. So if you have a custom field for your business or for your vendor record, you can do that. So in the form builder here. So really the theme of this is, again, highly customizable, pretty flexible to your business, but also pretty simple to navigate. And it does sync directly inside of the vendor record once it's been reviewed. And I'll walk through that a little bit more. Next up, I wanted to show how to create a vendor because that's very simple as well. It can apply to your existing vendors if you're going to create a new vendor in NetSuite, you can do that as well. But we also have kind of a lightweight version of that too as part of AVO. So if we go to new vendor here, just going to go ahead and leave. All you need to create a vendor simply is just like a test, an email address to where that information is going to, or the email invite is going to be sent, and then also the subsidiary. So let's say test demo company 2/17, today's date. And then I'll add my email here. Select the subsidiary. And then we're going to go ahead and create that vendor. And so that's going to create a vendor record, which is just the basic information here. So to start onboarding, we're going to go ahead and send the form directly through this. So let's send our form that we just created. I'm going to use the test template we just looked at, and we're going to go ahead and send that across. And as you can see, that's the email that this gets sent to. It's really important that that's the correct email. It's going to pull that information from the vendor record directly. The reason that's important is that's where the vendor is going to receive their email. And it's also a private encrypted link. So only the vendor, only the kind of email client that's associated to that email address can open that link. So the link cannot be shared with anyone else. And that's just an extra layer of like security and protection. Again, this is a very simple one. You can customize this as much as you'd like. But in this case, we're just going simple. You click the button here to start onboarding. And this is what the form that we just looked at looks like and how it's going to be communicated to the vendor. You can see a few things here. I mean, most of this is just free fill text. There's the W9 selection, which is going to be files. Payment information is going to be, you can either select check or ACH. So you can give that option to the vendor, or you can just enforce one option or another if you'd like as well. In the case that it is an ACH, obviously enter your account routing number. There's some very basic validation that happens here just to make sure that it looks like a routing and account number. And so you can gather all your payment information here. In this case, we're asking for primary and alternative contact information. And then what we are requiring here, you can see actually, I think this payment information is required, but also here a submitted by. That's always required, at least on this template. So that's kind of a template and what the actual vendor experience would look like. I want to now show quickly how that information gets communicated. So once a form has been submitted, it's going to tell you, it's going to show up in the Forms tab here. And you can see for this vendor, they changed their capitalization, they changed their phone number, and then they specified a kind of a slightly different address. So you can either like accept or deny the change. Red is going to mean there's a change. Green means there's no change on what the current record already says. If everything looks good and you agree to those changes, you have the option to say apply and review. And that's going to kind of apply that to your record, your vendor record, and just override the current information, and then you can go ahead and save that. So that's kind of the review process and how you apply that information to a vendor record. And then once you're done, you can click complete onboarding, and that kind of indicates that that vendor is ready to be paid, if in the case that payment information was communicated. In the case that ACH information is entered in that form, it's going to automatically kind of sync over to charted payments. I gotta shout out my payments module as well. So yeah, in the case that there is ACH or check information, and you have that vendor and you'd like to import that vendor, it's going to automatically create kind of a pay record where you can manage the invoice as well, manage the payment method information, and then ultimately release the payment. So we kind of do a one-click release process once your vendor is onboarded, and you can kind of make those payments directly. We also just recently started supporting international payments as well from the US to other countries, including FX. So just going to shout that out. But back to our main event. Yeah, so I think I've covered really the main aspects of vendor onboarding. If there are any like specific questions, I think Chris is going to close this out. But yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. It's pretty cool. Great demo there. Before we move on, we're going to zoom back out for just a minute. I'm sure all of you are fully aware vendor onboarding is just one part of the much bigger AP workflow that Marlon also went through a few minutes ago. And when the process involves too much back and forth and inefficiencies, the friction is going to show up everywhere else. And charted, we've got some charted customers on the call, some people that aren't yet customers, but we solve this end-to-end workflow natively within NetSuite, the whole thing, not just the vendor piece, but all of it. With seamless handoffs, every step made possible because we are a fully embedded solution. So whether you're a charted customer or not, it's be a good time to check in with your sales rep. If you don't have one, just kind of click the Get Started link on our site, or your customer success rep to see what it could look like to extend this NetSuite native workflow across vendor onboarding, invoices, approvals, payments, and even accruals. And next slide there. So let's see. So we've got something to help make today's presentation actionable. We put together a quick guide you can download. Take your phone out. I guess if that could be easy. Scan that QR code and then pull it back to your computer. Once you download that, I think we're going to put the link in the chat. And if it's not in there, then you're definitely going to get an email too at some point next couple days with a link to this guide. It says Stop Chasing Vendors for Payment Details, a NetSuite native guide to friction-free vendor onboarding. So I think you're going to want that to give it a look over and see if you can find ways to make your process even more efficient. And so now it's time for the question and answer portion. And we've got a few minutes left. Put your questions, click the Q&A button on the Zoom panel, Zoom action panel and ask something. We've got a question here from Chris. Can this tool be used to update information for existing vendors? So Marlon, why don't you answer that? We
Yep,
call it vendor, yeah, we call it vendor onboarding, but it's maybe
that's
a
right.
little misnomer. So
Advanced vendor management, perhaps. Yeah, maybe a rebrand for the marketing team. But yeah, so yeah, it can. So yeah, obviously, I kind of covered hey, this is a brand new vendor. In addition to well, kind of having the capability to send forms, you can also request for specific information. You can also follow up with vendors as well. The way you would manage that is once the form has been submitted and reviewed and applied to the vendor, you're going to go ahead and initiate a another form. And so you can send the form again and see if they want to just go through and update their entire information from start to finish. You can send like, for example, we have some customers, they just want to collect maybe address changes or business name changes or like payment changes, right? If they change their bank account. So that's another option to do kind of a narrowed down version of the full form that can be used to kind of manage information on an ongoing basis.
yeah, and that could even become even more of a value add because there may be times when you've got a process where you decided for compliance reasons or as a company that you now need to collect additional documentation from your vendors. Where if that process didn't involve an automation such as using our tool, even if you onboarded them nicely, now you've got to do this whole thing manual. So you can just set that you want this additional piece of information, then click
Yep,
that button in the vendor records, and then they get a form and they fill it out at their convenience. It pulls back in, you get to review that it's adequate before it gets applied to the vendor record. So it's a really seamless process for onboarding
absolutely.
management.
And if it's something also really required and not just like optional, you can also didn't mention this in the demo, but there's also a follow-up feature where you can essentially schedule automated follow-up. So you can say like every, 7 days, 3 days, keep sending this email to remind the vendor like this is super critical. And we want to make sure that this didn't get missed in the inbox, right? Which is kind of easy to do nowadays with how much volume, at least that I get on my business email. So I totally empathize with kind of vendors that are trying to deal with the information overload. So we do add that capability as well.
I got another question from Karima, and I'm not. I'll read it and we'll see if you can interpret it. And Karima, you may want to ask a quick follow-up if we don't fully understand what you're getting at. But what are the metrics that are actually offered? I currently have advanced vendor management through Charted. Do you
So yeah, I mean, in terms of vendor metrics, so I mean, there's a number of things you can do in terms of inside of NetSuite if you're tracking kind of KPIs for your organization and you're tracking, hey, how long does it take for a vendor to complete their information? How long does it take for a vendor to get paid? We are going to pipe basically most of the information or all the information that comes back in the EVO back to NetSuite. So if you have kind of like a saved search, a raw data feed, if you're pulling that information directly from NetSuite, maybe via an export, and feeding that into whatever tool you're using for kind of your business management, you can basically pull in all this information and the raw data back into your BI tool and use that for downstream reporting. Obviously, also NetSuite comes with a couple of the or a handful of these outside of the box, so you can just leverage what they have too. I think the key is like we do feed that information back over to NetSuite. So
yeah,
yeah, in
yeah,
terms of like KPI management, which I
yeah,
think was the
Karima,
crux
yeah,
of the
it
question.
is a data dump. Like we make sure all the data points are recorded, but we're currently not surfacing, charts or analytics around that particular data uh, for vendor onboarding. We do have charts and analytics in a way with our accrual automation product where we will show the the payment history over time and
Yeah.
the invoice volume for for individual vendors and such. So we've got an aspect of that, but there are many different types of data that would be useful, we know. So yeah, feel free
Absolutely.
to, like you send me the particular reports, the particular metrics that you feel like are really important to see, and we'll make sure that that gets logged as we're making updates to the product to know if that's something to prioritize.
Yep. Good shout out, Chris.
Yep.
Thanks for the
And
questions.
all right, I think we've actually hit about time now. We're to half past the hour, right?
Yep, that's right.
All right.
That's
Well,
a
yeah,
wrap.
feel free to follow up anybody. We're here. Just reach out, email, and we'll respond. And appreciate everybody on the
Thanks
call
all.
today. All right.